Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. This is our other talk within the nine-sided circle. I am your host, Nora Kyle.
And I am her faithful sidekick, Mushtaq Ali, who is about to tell her that she needs to up the gain on her mic.
Oh no, because I
Yeah, see, I'm good
unplugged
for
it.
something.
So many things. You shush. Okay, how about
That's
that?
better.
All right. So, like I said, this is our other talk, and we happen to hold this once monthly. This is a different time from our usual time. It is 10:30 a.m. Pacific on a Sunday. This is our third Sunday of the month. That's when we always have our other talk to accommodate the people who can't be here at our usual weekly time of 6:30 p.m. Pacific time on Sundays.
Also for people who just can't get enough of us.
Yeah. Gluttons for punishment, all of you. So please join us this evening if you like. We are come one, come all around here. And so happy that you can be here with us, whether you're here live or watching on the replay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, I guess I do need to do the YouTube spiel as always, where I invite you to support us by subscribing to our channel, liking this video, leaving some comments, maybe to us or to each other. You can answer people's questions if you happen to have the answer to someone's question there. And you can join our Facebook group. I strongly encourage you to join our email list. That's going to be not only the way to make sure that we stay in touch in these weirdo times where technology and social media seem to be in flux, and that is also, those are the two ways that you can join us live if you so desire. You can join us via our Facebook, you can join us via our email list. Those links are in the description, of course. You can also buy a t-shirt if you like. And since people have been asking about this lately, yes, we do still do one-on-ones. I should be saying that every week, but if I haven't been, that's your notice. You can email us to check in, see if that might be something you're interested in. We'll tell you our rates. We will give you our calendars for availability. But that is how we can support you one-on-one or two-on-one. Sometimes Mushtak and I do a little team work with people. So check in with us via email if that's something that interests you. So, without further ado, let's get to our first topic of the day, as we do ambitiously two topics on our Two Talk Sundays. Ah, what are we talking about today, Mushtaq?
Um, Good question. I think we're talking about, um, well, in the last couple of weeks, we've touched on some interesting Gurdjieffian ideas.
Yes, last
And
week we began to discuss the magnetic center.
yes. And so we're going to pick up on that a little bit, but we're going to focus on uh, the influences. Now, a while ago, and we will put a link to it on our end screen, we did a uh, talk on the Enneagram of the work. And this is another way of looking at the Enneagram of the work that doesn't necessarily go through the Enneagram.
You'll
Um,
see it if you're looking for it, though,
yeah. And the main materials for this come out of chapter 10 of In Search of the Miraculous. So,
by Ouspensky.
yeah, by Ouspensky. And there are some problems with that chapter. And I suspect that the problems are mostly from translation because In Search of the Miraculous was originally written in Russian and translated into English much later. Um, And so some of the ways that ideas are framed are kind of ill-formed. So uh, we'll try and unpack that. I know it's very arrogant to think that we could say something better than Ouspensky or Gurdjieff, but
We'll give
we're
it a
going to do
shot.
it anyway. For those of
Yes.
you who have sacred cows, we're going to tip them.
Yep. As we were wont to do from time to time.
Yes.
So, the title of this talk was Beyond the Law of Accident, the Three Influences in the Path to Higher Knowledge. Wow, that's pretty highfalutin there.
Bombastic.
Yeah.
So
So,
let's start
yeah.
with that idea of uh, beyond accident.
Mm.
Now, Gurdjieff talks about the law of accident, and this refers to the idea of um, fate versus destiny. Fate is mechanical. Fate is stimulus response, and uh, without, if you don't do anything, your life is going to end up in a particular way. We see this in inherited trauma in families, for instance. If your parents were alcoholics, you're liable to end up to be an alcoholic. And
It,
with
yeah.
very little skill, you can begin to predict people's fates. You get to know them and you know where they will end up. And that's where we all start. We all start out in fate. Destiny, on the other hand, is what you get when you become more conscious, when you begin operating from uh, the true I rather than just the mechanical I.
Take care of that.
Hello.
John,
Hello.
you
Hello.
madman.
Well, I would hope that my sanity would never be in question, but it is obvious that it is always is in flux.
So, welcome. I'm glad you were able to drop in.
Oh no, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, John is an old friend of mine. He used to put on tournaments in Chicago that I would drag my kids to and let them beat up people or get beaten up, as the case may be. Both learning experience.
Exactly. You can only possess what you experience.
Yes. So anyway, back to the topic at hand. Um, this whole idea came out in Gurdjieff's work, talking about how to find the way. And uh, he noted that the starting point for finding the way is not, it doesn't begin within regular mechanical life. It is accidental, unfortunately, in most cases, but something happens that causes you to wonder about what is actually possible. And most of you, if you look back in your life, you will find some point where you went, hmm, how did we, uh, how did we get here? So for me, it was the discovery at the age of 14, I think, of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And that gave me the sense that there are possibilities beyond what we normally experience. And that's what Gurdjieff would call a B influence, which we will get to later. Um, so you don't have to tell us, but think about for a moment, what was the experience that put your feet on the path?
I
Now,
mean,
go ahead, Noor.
some people might be comfortable sharing. Is that
Some
okay?
people might. Yeah.
Diva.
Got to turn on your microphone, Diva.
Do you want me to turn it on for you? There you
Okay,
go.
I
You
got
got it.
it. I don't think it was ever an experience. Could it just, it was always in the back of my head that life doesn't seem real to me. Like it never has seemed real. I had just always knew there was just something more, and I was always curious.
Can you think back to the point in your life where you realized that life did not seem real?
I was very small. Well, I was a child, and I could see beings in my room, and I always thought aliens were visiting me. I mean, I could see beings in my room at 4 years old, and then I remember like at 7, I was always looking out the window, wondering when the aliens were going to come back. I was a very strange kid. Um, and my whole life was like, I mean, it's always been like that.
Yeah. So, early childhood, something went pop to the back of your head.
I had an abusive childhood.
Yeah. So, who else can think back to the starting point, what we call the initiating shock?
I mean, for myself, in terms of that thing that set me on a different trajectory than I might have otherwise, it was falling in love with a girl at first sight at arthritis camp at 16. That changed everything. So that was mine. What about you, Ian?
Yeah, for me, I think the defining moment was when I decided to leave the church when I was around 14, curiously the same age as Mushtaq was. And that was when I started exploring other religions, starting with Buddhism, then moving on slightly to Zen, but all sorts of other things, and eventually coming across Sufism via Rumi's Mafnawi and Uspensky, and then Gurdjieff, all in my late teens.
Very cool. Thanks, Ian. One more, perhaps?
Yeah, one more.
Well, I'll volunteer.
Sure. Go ahead, John.
So throughout my life, temporally, I have dreamed stuff prior to it happening. So, and this is things that would happen in the future. And it was almost, some of these things were almost verbatim occurring. And that's when I realized that maybe time isn't exactly linear in how we think of it.
All right, then. Yeah, definitely one of those things that is hard to, for many of us culturally, to connect with until we have some unusual experience like that. Thank you,
Rat
John.
has written something. Would you like to read it, Noor?
I would happily read it. All right. Rat says, Rat was a rabid atheist until early 20s and had an unexpected and unsought realization of emptiness. from which came the divine. And it rocked me. And having read and seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, didn't tell anyone. Oh, that must have been hard. Well, thank you for sharing
Yeah,
with us.
but wise.
Yeah. James, and then we'll move on.
Yes.
Um, been a pile of stuff, but the first big shock I think was when I was must have been around 7 years old, and I realized I was mortal. I realized this body was going to die. I realized with absolute clarity. Death is the thing that's going to happen to me. That unsettled me. And then there's whole stacks of things I encountered through my life, like thinking about grade 6 primary school. I discovered the book Zen Dawn in the West by Kaplau, and basic concentrating on the breath counting, and I kept bumping into things. Then probably around 2007, I had a very interesting experience. I call it my walk in the park. I've sort of mentioned this before, where everything became evident to me that everything was a mystery and all phenomena were upheld by something deeper, and some experiences after that. So I don't know how you sort A from B. Like, I was forever seeking out weird and exotic information to alleviate boredom as well as satisfy my questions. So there's two kind of passion for the exotic and genuine existential inquiry. That was throughout my life. My mind is always directed that way. But if you want the big shock, it started with death awareness when I was about 7 years old.
That'll do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, James. All right.
So
Let's
one of
continue.
the things that I want everybody to notice is that so you have Gurdjieff's idea of A influences. He calls them in life itself, which I think is a poorly crafted way to say this. These are the influence of nation, country, climate, family, education, society, profession, manners and customs, wealth, poverty, current ideas, and so on. These are the mechanical influences of everyday life, and we are all subject to them. And they are all under the dominion of your fate. They are completely accidental. Where you were born is an accident. How you live is accidental. Whether you're rich or poor is a form of accident. All of these things.
Genetics in general. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if you stick with what Gurdjieff calls A influences, your life is basically laid out for you from beginning to end. And it follows a natural, mechanical way of existence. Nothing wrong with that. Most people like it. Um,
It gets
but
you there from birth to death.
yeah, it keeps you occupied, right? If you are not doing mechanical influences and you have nothing else, you spend a very boring life staring at the wall. So you have that. Now, there are also what Gurdjieff called uh, type B influences. And he says they come from outside this life. And this is not true. They come from outside the mechanical life. Um, he calls them influences of the inner circle or esoteric influences that are created under different laws, although also from this existence. Um, these influences different from the former because they come from into being in a conscious way in their origin.
So they start out
Yeah.
non-mechanical.
They start out non-mechanical by conscious individuals for a definite purpose. The problem with B influences is that once they have been released into the world, they will inevitably become more mechanical. An example would be the Yoga Sutras that I mentioned, which were translated by a guy who was obviously, to me now, completely mechanical in his nature, and he was a Christian apologist. So everything that he translated, he did these commentaries on how they were actually related to, he was, I think, Anglican, so related to the Anglican Church and its self-evident truths. And so with B influences, you always get the mechanical beginning to impose itself onto whatever it is. Religions are another example of this. Religions start out as conscious influences for the most part, and over time become completely mechanical. Hopefully that will not upset too many people.
Oh, in the chat.
Yeah, Board has something to say.
Yes. This is very interesting. My quote, shock, unquote, was as a suggestion from someone that led me down a certain path that I pursued wholeheartedly. But then that was corrected in a dream some years later, which created a lot of conflict in my life. Perhaps because my 12-year-old self didn't really understand what to do with the initial suggestion. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. And thank God for course corrections.
Yeah.
So
As you were saying, the
the
what
B
starts out,
influences start out
yeah,
as conscious work. So you get religious teachings, philosophical doctrines, works of art, and like that. They're led into life for a definite purpose. And unfortunately, they become mixed with the influences of the A influences. And you have to remember, and this is important, that the B influences were conscious, awake influences only at their inception. So 2,000, 3,000 years later, there is nothing left of the original spark in many cases.
and that goes for like all of them,
Yeah,
basically,
all of them.
including Islam, you know. So
Yeah.
James says, religion begins as mysticism and ends as politics. Can't remember who said that, but it makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. I wonder who did say that.
I think there's a lot of self-entrapment. Like when we have some of those moments where we feel that we see the way forward, then the next thing we do is trap ourselves in a certain pattern of working.
Mm.
I remember I had an experience like that with Mushtaq, and I spent a lot of time making up models for what I felt I understood. And I presented them to him, and I was very excited. And he said, "Oh, there will be others," meaning other models. So I was going down into a tunnel, you know, of sort of entrapping myself in what I felt was what he was pointing at.
Thank you for sharing that. Excellent, life experiential example. Yeah. Or, we get handed this paradigm, and then in trying to live up to it, we just kind of crumble ourselves into this collapsed mess of who we think we're supposed to be and what we think we're supposed to do.
Or we get stuck in dogma
Yes. Yep.
Yes. And
that
that
I've
is,
always found myself getting stuck into.
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, you don't want dogma, you want katma. Katma is where I'll believe it today, maybe I won't tomorrow.
That's very Catholic.
Yes.
Yes.
Or maybe I'll just knock the knickknack off the shelf.
All right.
So once B influences come into the world, they begin to fall under the general law of accident and begin to act mechanically. And this is a problem because in many of them, you can feel the truth in them, but if you follow as presented, it will take you down a mechanical path. That was one of my biggest revelation with the Yoga Sutras was there's truth here. And this guy who translated doesn't know what the truth is. If I listen to him, there is no truth.
That's what can be so heartbreaking and challenging about this, huh?
Yeah.
You
And
know
my
there's something
solution to
there.
that was to start learning Sanskrit so I could read them myself.
Yep.
And I had, you know, when I was presented with the Quran, I started learning Arabic because I knew that the translations were all wrong. I had
Yeah.
discovered that by this time. In dealing with the Bible, I started studying Greek and Hebrew so I could have some sense of what it really said versus what people decided that it said over a course of thousands of years.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, our understanding, even if we know the native language of a text is going to be refracting the meaning of the text, then you add the layer of the translation, which has been refracted through someone else's mind, then through yours. The thing
Well,
about,
it's been paraphrased. Some
yes,
Yeah. And sometimes it has been incredibly wrongly translated.
that too.
yeah,
Yeah. One of my favorites when I get my whipping stick out is the first verses of John, where it talks about logos, and it translates the logos as word, which is valid as far as it goes, but it's not the first thing you would find if you looked up logos in a Greek dictionary. You would find reason as the very first definition of that word.
Where we get the English word logic from, obviously. Yes.
Yeah. You would also find ratio, interestingly.
Steve says, it seems that unless a person is born into a family of critical thinkers and people who are allowed to question, quote unquote, mechanicalism, unquote, will happen.
Yeah. Oftentimes, even if they are.
I was going to say it's going to happen anyway. It's
Yeah.
kind of, it's everyone struggles. It's a matter of degrees and it's a matter of where.
Yeah. And here's the thing. If we did not have our mechanical nature, there would be nothing to resist.
Nothing to
And
grow
yeah, you
against,
don't build except against resistance.
Mhm.
You don't build muscle, you don't build consciousness.
Yeah.
You need to have that thing to push against, to struggle against, to make yourself conscious. I mean, maybe somewhere there's somebody who is actually lotus born and here they are and they're enlightened from the moment that they begin existing. But if you look at that more critically, you find that they spent 10,000 incarnations thinking that God was a newt or something.
This wooden totem.
Ian, you have thoughts?
I was just going to say I'm a counterexample to that. My family were definitely not critical thinkers.
Mm, yep. Rat says, Gurdjieff struggled with how to leave his legamanism.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little bit. So, if one begins to pay attention to the B influences, one can form what G called a magnetic center. A magnetic center is nothing more than the impulse towards truth.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
That really breaks it down. Takes everything we talked about last week and just goes,
Yep.
there you go. Impulse towards truth.
And without that impulse towards truth, you're not going anywhere. You will be
Yes.
perfectly happy living a mechanical life. And you have every right to live a life as mechanical as you want it.
Rat puts it well too. Rat says, it's the taste for things that are true.
Yeah, I like that.
Oh, it's a title of a book, if they recall correctly.
So, once you get the sense that there are these influences that can help you grow, you begin to look for them. You begin to uh, look for the influences that will help your magnetic center to focus itself. And it will begin to influence your orientation. It will even begin to force you to completely change your life. We've seen this happen a number of times. Um, Eckhart Tolle is an example of this. He was a depressed, miserable human being who, uh, through developing his own magnetic center, had a revelation that turned him completely around. His story is interesting for that. He's still boring, but his story is interesting. Now, the magnetic center can be ill-formed, and this is a danger. Uh,
This we did not cover last
we
week,
did
so
not cover
this
on
is
that.
important.
Yeah. An ill-formed magnetic center is going to lead you down the wrong path, and you get an ill-formed magnetic center through mistaking truth for the bullshit of some human being, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, the bullshit of some human being for truth. Yes.
Yeah, because all type B influences become mechanical as they go along. So an example of that that I can speak to from direct influence is Werner Erhard and Est. This goes back for most people. Some of you may have never even heard of this person. Back in the early 70s, he was a big deal. He formed Earhart Seminars training, and people would go to it, and they'd have enlightening experiences. And it was formed out of a real experience that Earhart had, a moment of awakening. And I was lucky enough to meet him and get involved with his work just after that, when he was the only one doing it, and uh, every training was spontaneous and very, very interesting. Within a very short time, this all changed. And he tried to take his awakening and turn it into a business, and you can't do that. And so it became mechanical. And this was somewhat heartbreaking for me because I was pretty young at the time and I had never experienced this before. But I remember the moment that I realized that this had all become bullshit, and I turned around and just walked out of the place and never came back. Uh, and I'm lucky because some people didn't do that, and they're still stuck out there. And this was very, very unfortunate, but if you are not cognizant at all times of what's really going on around you, you can have an ill-formed magnetic center that leads you to a mechanical impulse that is disguised as conscious. This requires a huge amount of discernment, and it's an explanation of why people get caught in cults.
Even the best intentioned, most well-meaning, most searching for the truth people.
Yeah. And it is easier for a smart searching for truth people to be caught in a cult than it is for a stupid person.
Why do you think that is?
Because we are more clever at convincing ourselves that we are still going down the right path if we are
And
smart.
self-criticism in terms of, the am I full of shit question, that can be hard for people who are really too smart for their own good. All right. Okay. I don't know what you
Yeah,
make of
that's
this, but
Steve has a very good question. He's
okay.
curious about what people think about J. Krishnamurti's teachings on choiceless awareness. Um, I don't know that we have time to get into that today, but that is something we should talk about.
I can write it down and make a
Write it
note.
down. So we'll probably do a talk with that maybe next week. That could be a good topic for next week. Yeah, and if you want to, yeah, James points out that smart people will create the best rationalizations.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you,
Yeah.
James.
And you can see that. Go watch the what did they call it? The Nexium thing that
I don't remember what it was called.
yeah.
There's been a couple of them, but
Yeah.
that's one of the recurring themes in those documentaries is the people saying, I just, it made sense at the time. I made excuses for the things that were happening that seemed to make sense to me at the time.
Yeah.
And only when they're out of it are they like, I don't know how I thought that, but I know I'm not a stupid person. We all just encouraged each other to believe this thing, and it worked in terms of keeping everything together in a bad way.
Now, if your magnetic center is well formed, there is a possibility that you will connect with the work. And the thing is that you don't connect with the work through a book. The only way to connect with the work is by direct contact with somebody who is in the work. This is also tricky. We'll get to that in a minute. The way is always direct one-to-one contact. It may be many ones, but it is personal. And it has to come from somebody who can be conscious, somebody who can be awake. When you do this, when you make contact with somebody who is in the work in a real sense, you have the possibility of moving from fate to destiny. And that's a very big leap, but it is absolutely essential to free yourself from the law of accident, to step away from hazard. And that influences of the second kind you can get from books and systems and religions and rituals, but the third kind can only proceed from one person to another directly by means of oral transmission, mostly oral transmission. I would say actually that it is by means of transmission through all of the senses, but words are the main carrier. Does this make sense to you?
Any questions about that? Yeah, you want to speak up? Or did I see you unmuted? There you
I was
are.
just going to say that I know you mentioned Freemasonry here in the past, but Freemasonry is kind of like a good example of a pretty old school, but there are no teachers in Freemasonry. So each generation sort of just interprets whatever material is being passed on as they see it. There's no contact to a continuing, should we say, presence throughout the centuries, if you know if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, and that's a tragedy that we still suffer from because Freemasonry came out of something real. And somehow it lost its teacher, it lost its ability to teach. And we're going to look at how that might happen in just a few minutes. But it's an interesting thing because I mean, I know on a very personal level that Freemasonry can produce awake people, but it happens almost accidentally. One of my early mentors was a Freemason. That was his entire path in his life. And it woke him up. And I knew him when he was in his 80s and he was still incredibly vital and, you know, lived the truth that he had found there. So you can find it anywhere, but some days are harder than others.
So there's this sense of some kind of direct sensory transmission, usually through words, but not only through words, or not always through words.
Yeah, and not always through profound words.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best teachings I learned were working with my teacher in his pizza shop, making pizza. The way of the Tsar. So,
So uh, the idea is these aren't subject to the mechanization of things. Yes?
yes. Now, Gurdjieff uses the model of going up a staircase to talk about this. And it's when somebody meets a conscious influence, usually in the form of another person or people. And that puts him on the first step, according to Gurdjieff. Uh, and he says, between life and the way lies the stairway. Only by passing along the stairway can a man enter the way. So the stairway is not the way. And this is important. The initial steps to waking up get you to the work, but they are not the work in and of itself. Board says, that is wild. The dream that corrected my path when I was 14 happened in a stairway where I was told to go in a different way. Exactly.
Mysterious.
Definitely mysterious.
So Steve says, can color be used as a transmitter?
How would you use it as a transmitter? In order to use color as a transmitter, the color has to be put, or colors would have to be organized in a meaningful way. So you could say Da Vinci used color as a transmitter, but shining a colored light on somebody might not have the same effect as standing in front of one of Da Vinci's masterpieces. So getting onto a way requires a rightly guided individual to help you up those initial steps. And getting up this metaphorical stairway is not a sure thing. You can fall back down. You may have to restart from the beginning um, for a number of reasons. But once you have gotten to the top, everything changes. This is where we talk about the equator on the Enneagram.
Yeah, the point
Once
of
you pass the equator,
no return.
no
Yeah.
return. You
Yes.
cannot uneat the food.
You cannot unsee what has
Yeah.
been seen.
Yes.
It's that sense of even if you wanted to go back, you would not be going back to the same life, the same lifestyle, all of the same thought processes that you had not that long ago before you had to use this metaphor, taking those steps up the staircase.
And once you have made that transition, a guide is less useful. Still useful, but less useful. Now, in this chapter, he first talks about the way because that was how the question was asked. And then he points out that there are different ways, which is, we know that's part of his teaching, and he talks about the fourth way. The fourth way is a way, as far as I'm concerned, that he derived from his experiences with certain Sufis in Central Asia. People can argue with me about that if they like, but I will probably wander away in boredom if you do. Um, One of the things that is essential to this way, to what Gurdjieff talked about, to what Sufis talk about, is if you have attained, it is required of you to give back.
Yeah. It's a responsibility
Yes.
to guide others to the extent you can,
Yeah. And this
as you
does
have
not
been
mean that
guided.
you're going to become uh, some sort of spiritual teacher. You can guide others through any form of teaching, through any form of experience that you can make.
Yep. And it's in proportion with your own development as you go along.
Yes, and that's important to realize. When you get teachers, they are more developed than you are, but they're not necessarily uh, great enlightened masters. Gurdjieff points out that the lower a person is on the stairway, the greater the teacher they want. So the ultimate noobs want, he likens it to wanting Jesus as a teacher, right? And he points out that in order to have Jesus as a teacher, you have to be at the level of an apostle. Otherwise, you aren't going to get there. And if you read your Bible, you will discover that Jesus taught that explicitly at one point, telling his apostles that what I tell you straightforward, but for these people out there, I have to tell them in metaphor. So the other thing is that according to G's model, you cannot advance unless you are helping others advance as well. There is a certain back pressure that you get if you are surrounded by people who are learning this, and it pushes you as a
Mhm.
teacher.
Yeah. He even goes as far to say is that if your students are not advancing enough to be able to help others, that will hold you back as well.
Yes. Which is basically saying that you are obligated to the universe for having the path put under your feet. And that obligation is to help anybody else who wants it if you can. It doesn't mean help everybody, because not there is no one person who can teach everyone. Gurdjieff likes to talk about people who are teachers being connected to esoteric traditions. And it helps. I should say here that I am not convinced that you absolutely have to have a connection to a living teacher. I think that it is possible for any human being to do the entirety of the work with no help at all. But I think that it is profoundly difficult. And most of the people who I have run across who thought that they didn't need a teacher needed a teacher powerfully. So here's a question. What is the primary purpose of a teacher? This is not rhetorical. I want to hear your answers. Then I'll tell you the truth.
Oh, great and mighty teacher.
To teach themselves while they teach you.
Say again?
To teach themselves while they teach you.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's not the main reason for a teacher, though.
I mean, my opinion is that should be the case in terms of, being, as a teacher, being open to further learning in gratitude to the students.
I
They-
think it would be
someone-
so you don't
oh, sorry.
lie to yourself,
Okay.
to keep you
Ooh.
truthful.
That is the answer I want to hear.
Okay.
The main purpose of a teacher is to
Great.
point out when you're bullshitting yourself.
Yes. Excellent. Yeah, it's the means for the gut check. Am I, as they say, am I doing what I'm doing in a good way? The result of that is going to show up in how your students are coming along. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Ford.
And in return, the student helps the teacher check themselves to make sure that they're not full of shit.
Oh, directly. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, not just indirectly, but directly. Okay, anyways. Yes.
Yeah.
Ford.
Rat makes a very interesting comment. Do you want to
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the people who we're trying to talk to.
yeah.
Where is it? Okay, I'll read Rat's thing because that's relevant to what we were speaking about before. Okay. Rat says regarding the staircase delta, climbing the staircase. G said something like it takes 12 extra years of education to be a surgeon, but for some reason, folk expect, quote, the absolute for dummies in 24 hours, unquote.
Yes, and that is definitely the truth.
All right. Okay. Steve, that may be a little tangential, but you ask, what role does magic have in the work? Ritual magic, if any, please. And do you and I believe that the work predates any and all spiritual traditions? I mean, it depends on what we mean by the work.
Yeah, and it depends on what we mean by magic. We've talked about magic in various different places. And we start with this. What most people perceive as magic is just paying attention. If you want to seem magical to the people around you, have a really sharply focused attention and pay deep attention to the world. And then what you do will seem magical. After that, who cares? Um, do I believe that the work predates uh,
Any and
all
all
spiritual
spiritual
traditions?
traditions.
I don't believe anything if I can help it. The work is. The work exists now. I can speculate that the work probably existed before. The work transforms itself. We can see that in the various emanations of the work. Yeah, but the work exists now. That's where um, I like to remain.
Yeah. And the
And
word,
that I don't need to believe. That I can experience.
and this idea of the work is a placeholder for something we as humans are inclined to do. So in that sense, I do think it predates any and all spiritual traditions. If we're, having this metaphorical magnetic center, as Rat was saying, we have a taste for the truth in some way. And I think that that's a human impulse if we allow it to develop. We're just back. Um, okay, so bored. I'm sorry that you didn't get to talk yet.
Well, you can talk now.
Yes.
Fine. Eva said what I was going to say. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show we have such brilliance here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add?
Well, it was just a thing that, speaking for myself only, there's a enormous tendency to do self-entrapment, to get, favorite things that seem so true and so wonderful, it has to be the right way. And then, after a little while, what you meet at the end of the path is just a hard wall.
Yep.
So,
And then you have to reorient.
yeah. And that's where the teacher is actually quite good to have sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ian, talk to us.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think the idea that the work predates any and all is probably correct in the sense that Noor put it. People had to have a taste for the truth and so on. Sorry.
Bless you.
But I think it may be more accurate to say that a particular form of organization of the work is something that has evolved differently at different times and in different places.
Yeah, that would be absolutely fair to say.
I think
I would
that's,
go so far as to say that the work must change in every generation.
mm-hmm. Yep.
The work as we present it is not what Gurdjieff presented. The work that Gurdjieff presented is not what his teachers presented to him, and so on and so forth.
Yes. And so it shall be with anyone who follows after me and you.
Yeah, you're going to have to redo everything to fit people, place, time, and situation.
Yeah. And even between you and me, there are ways that we share the work differently.
Yeah,
So that's an entirely natural thing.
yeah, she does it better than me. I'm too old and grumpy.
You do a good job of tying so many things together, and I think we all appreciate that.
Yeah. And this is driven home to us because we've been traveling around a lot. And recently we were in the Emirates, where the work must be presented in a slightly different way than it is here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or did you have more you wanted to share? Does anyone have anything they want to add before we move forward? Okay. All right.
So,
Anything left that we need to say?
yes, the
Go
last
on.
parts. We have to understand that the way, the path, the work is like being in bloody water surrounded by sharks. There's an old Turkish saying that I love, which is if you make yourself into a donkey, there's always somebody who will be willing to ride you. And this is, let me look at my notes here. Gurdjieff talks about if your magnetic center has been formed correctly, then you're going to draw in the right sorts of guides. But if it hasn't, you're going to get ill-formed guides. And he points out that there are basically three,
Three types, yeah.
three types. So you're going to bump across the people who say that they know the way and that they're connected with the tradition, but they aren't.
Yeah. And these can be well-intentioned, but, ignorant or
Yeah.
oblivious types.
And you have to ask that of everyone, including us.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, we are brave and honest and tell you the truth all the time, but you don't know that. You don't know that at all. And I'll get to that in a moment. So there are people who are deluded into thinking that they're in the work, and they are not connected with it. So he may be generally mistaken and think that he knows something, but in reality, he doesn't know anything. He or she may believe another teacher, another person, who is in turn may be mistaken.
So they've been misled,
Yeah,
and that person has been misled.
yeah. There's a great Sufi story. I love this story. It's short, so I'm going to tell it to you. There was once a teacher who was never really a teacher, and one day he realized it. And he was shocked and horrified because he had been a Sufi teacher for many years. And he called his head student in. He said, I've realized that I'm a fraud, that I don't know anything.
The
And
ultimate imposter syndrome
yeah, the
moment, right?
ultimate imposter syndrome. And his student said, shh, don't tell anybody because three more of your students just achieved awakening. There are some deeper truths in that. Doesn't usually work out that way, though. The third kind is the most dangerous, and that is the one who deceives intentionally, consciously, who says, I know the way, and for $29.95, I will give you the first step on the way. And again, this is where you want to study cults, and we can do that now more than at any time in the past because our communication systems are so strong right now. So take a look at how Nexium managed to bamboozle people so deeply, how Scientology to this day continues to uh, draw people into its network of bullshit, how evangelical Christian denominations take you completely away from the teaching of Jesus while convincing you that you are following Jesus. Look at these things. Look at everything. And ask yourself, how much of this is conscious deception? How much of this is deception by people who think that their teacher knew, so they're following their teacher, and how much of it is people who are deluded into thinking they know when they don't. And if you know how to look, it will all be mechanical at its base. And the question of how do you recognize this? How do you recognize a true teacher? And the answer is you don't. Not at first. Because you cannot perceive the state of a person whose state is above yours.
Mhm. Yeah, that's why we have to be so, as we've said before, we watch our step as we go along. That's one of our tenets, right?
Yeah.
And that's because discernment takes time to develop. So we really don't have any reason to rush into these things.
Steve had to take off. Hopefully he will be fine.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. So, what do you do? First of all, look at the behavior of the teacher. Do they walk their talk? Sometimes you can see, sometimes you can't. So, what else do you do? Look at their students. I will relate to you again for the umpteenth time my experience with the Fellowship of Friends, who are they claim to be a Gurdjieff Ouspensky group, but they're actually a cult. This was years ago when they were actively recruiting. They would put bookmarks in all of the Gurdjieff books, giving their addresses and stuff. And one group did a talk in the town where I was living. Yes, the people of the bookmark. I went to their lecture. I had just come from, my teacher had sent me to a Mevlevi Sheikh to practice, to learn to do the turn. And I had come from that practice directly to this. So I was probably a little high. Uh, and these guys did this whole song and dance about Ouspensky and consciousness and their teacher and how he was man number 6 or 7, I don't even remember, but some really high up muckety muck, and how we could come and study with him if we were worthy. And at the end, they said, do you have any questions? Now, I was in my 20s at this time, so I was maybe less discreet than I am these days. So, any questions? And I put my hand up and I said, how long has your teacher been teaching? And they said, about 25 years now. And then I said, in that 25 years, how many people has he advanced to his level? And you could hear a pin drop in the room. And it was like, why, no one. It's like, how could anybody be at his level? And I stood up, thanked them for their time, and walked out. Because if you've got to take 25 years and you have not raised a single person to your own level, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Who have you pulled up behind you? Isn't that
Yes.
one of the things we're talking about? And
Yep.
he failed to do that.
And it turns out that that whole organization is a weird cult. And that is my main discernment. You know, yeah. Who have you raised to your level? And there's a few times that I've run across people who have lived up to that. There was a teacher back in the day that he was out of the Advaited tradition, And one day he started having one of his students sit up with him and help him teach because that student had finished the course, was no longer a student. And eventually that student went off and formed his own group. So that's my last thought on this, is that um, the path has a lot of traps. And um, it is best to figure out how to avoid them while staying in the work.
Knowing that you are vulnerable
Yeah.
is a big part of this.
And making sure that teachers uh, follow that rule, especially in the work. In Sufism, if you are a sheikh, your job is to create khalifas. Khalifas are your representatives, the people who you have raised to your level so that they can go out and do the work. It's like my teacher raised in his lifetime, my last teacher, probably 75 khalifas. He used to say, I will never be as good as my teacher because my teacher raised 240 khalifas in his lifetime. One last thought. In the work, there is not one teacher. There will be many teachers. As a matter of fact, everybody around you is potentially a teacher. Any person who is just a little bit above you, when you interact, is a teacher for you. Even if they're below you, they can be a teacher for you. And so I like this because it helps to protect from the cult of personality. And the cult of personality is one of the greatest dangers of the path.
Yep. The potential to make so much growth happen and then get stuck because you are dedicated to being stuck, be
Yeah.
dedicated to some individual.
Who will never raise you up.
Mm.
Because the cult of personality is pyramidal, hierarchical. So that's pretty much all I had for today. Noor?
I think we covered a lot of bases. So, yeah, as you said, um, I want to make sure that we reiterate, observe the behavior of the teacher. They don't have to be a perfect human being. In fact, it's very likely they won't be. And if you're expecting them to be, that should clue you in that you have some maturation to do on your own journey. This is that thing where Gurdjieff was talking about if you want your teacher to be Jesus, you're probably in trouble. You probably need to check yourself. So there's that. Make sure that they're walking their talk, you know, something in a way that you would aspire to, something that makes you feel like you can trust them.
Yeah, I think it was Jafar al-Siddiq, one of the great teachers, said, show me your religion without speaking.
Yes, I think that's always been a favorite saying of mine. And again, observe their students, observe the people who are already learning from them. Are they seeming to be making progress? Do you see growth in them? Do you admire their behavior? Is there something about them that you think I would like to bring some of that into my own life? Because you're not only going to be learning from the teacher, perhaps, but you may be learning from their other students as well.
Yeah. And you need to ask two questions. Would I want to be that person when I grow up?
Mm.
First question. Second question is, why would I want to be that person when I grow up? Because oftentimes the answer is because that person has all the power. And that's a wrong answer.
Yeah. I want cronies.
Yeah, minions. I have to admit, I would still like minions. I will even buy their overalls for them.
Oh man, we could use the help. Yes. Is there a third thing, or is it mainly those two things?
It's those two things mainly.
Yeah.
Because you got
Yeah.
to question why you would want to be that person.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. And one thing I think needs to be said is, as you said, many people can be your teachers. And there be maybe one person who has a certain degree of advancement in a particular area of uh, this inner maturing, and another person who has strengths in a different area.
Yeah. And it is always through direct contact.
Hmm. Yep.
It used to be direct contact was you had to go to wherever the teacher was and sit at their feet. Now you can just jump on Zoom, and here we all are.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, Noor, who do you want to hear from?
Ah, who might I like to hear from? Well, you seem like you've got thoughts.
Um, I have many really, but I was listening very, very, very carefully, uh, particularly to the role that a teacher has um, in bringing people up to his or her standard, and how different that is from the majority of teachers in my part of the world, and specifically how mechanically, at least in my part of the world, the teacher has been given this almost infallible position to the extent where asking direct questions, difficult questions of a teacher is mechanically considered insulting because you've put him or her on the spot and so on. Um, and to be able to come across a group of people like in this school where that's the opposite, where we are encouraged to ask difficult questions and we are given the space to challenge, and I use that word rather loosely. I consider it testing. I'll test with my question and see what bounces back. Um, but the only thought that comes to mind right now that I think is worth sharing is sometimes you'll bump into somebody that has that level and has that direct effect on you in terms of getting you closer to the work or progressing in the work. But because they're so rare, we might have met them 10 times already, but we're not recognizing them for what they are. And that's because we're looking in the wrong direction. So it is tricky. It is tricky. But I'm just grateful to have an example in you, Noor, Mushtaq, and everybody here, whether it's John, Ian, we're all teaching each other at one particular time. So that's what's on my mind.
Hmm. Yeah. You mentioned infallibility, and my teaching style is such that I think there's a lot to learn from the teacher's fallibility. So, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and it reminds me of one of my favorite. For those of you who know, there was a character known as Alfred E. Newman, and somebody did a Tonka painting of him dressed as a Tibetan Buddha with the words above, "What? Be infallible?"
What, me worry?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Ford, I see you. Did you have something you wanted to add, Mushtaq?
no.
Okay. Yes, I see you unmuted, Board.
It's for me it's a bit complex, and I hope it comes across right, because I've experienced in my time with teachers that um, sometimes there's been moments when what they've given has given me a feeling of having great power. I'm not saying that in terms of having power over others or having power over what happens in the world, but just this sense of being in control of me. And that has often led me to making some of the biggest mistakes in my life. And it has irritated me a little bit, because why didn't the teacher tell me this would happen? Or why didn't the teacher stop me? But, I would never have learned from that.
That's the
And
problem.
yeah. And I feel that's actually kind of an important thing, that you are given some tools, you are given some pretty sharp knives or scissors that you can cut yourself with. And that's a part of the process. In more cult-like groups, you're told that if you just do this, everything will be okay, and you do the best you can to follow whatever is being said. But I feel like with an authentic teacher, there's an aspect of danger in the
Yeah.
process.
And that's absolutely the case. The work is not safe.
Yeah.
That's such a fascinating way to put it. I mean, it's being treated like an adult
Yeah.
as opposed to being continuously infantilized. Like, oh, no, 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 don't do that. That's bad for you. How do you how do you discover that for yourself? Not that I, for one, would want to put someone in danger, but I also have to say to them, look, here's what can happen. I am not going to get in your way if you choose to take that route. I think to some extent, I do think that the teacher has a responsibility to inform, not dictate, but inform. But some
Yeah.
teachers are going to be more hands off than
Yeah.
that, even.
And it's nice when you can catch a student when they fall.
Hmm.
Doesn't always work, but it's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. But you bring up some very critical points about the risk involved. So thank you for that. Anything else you want to add? I see you looking thoughtful.
Just think for me, that's been a very, I guess that's why I come back and return, because it's been very useful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what use anything would have been if I didn't make the mistakes I made.
Yeah.
Yep.
Reminds me of a great Sioux holy man, John Fire Lame Deer, who in his youth was a reprobate, a drunk, a
Troublemaker.
a troublemaker. Yeah. And then he became a holy man. And somebody said to him, how can you be a holy man when you lived this life before that was obviously not good? And he replied, how can I tell anybody anything about how to live a good life if I don't know what they're going through?
Mm-hmm.
So it all works out.
Yep. Yeah. Student makes a bunch of mistakes, becomes the teacher, teaches from those mistakes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Who else have we not heard from?
Um,
And
hold that thought, James. Jill, I want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts.
yeah. Are we crazy?
I've not determined that yet.
Let us know if you figure it out.
Looking pretty good so far. Yeah. Testing from the corner here. Testing. Yeah, I was 5 in the very rigid, deep South church of my ancestry. And I realized some of these other girls in my school going to other churches that it made no sense that they were going to hell because they didn't go to my church. And that was the teaching that was. And so at 5, I knew that that wasn't the place. I couldn't do anything about it then. So yeah, kept my mouth shut and here I am. So I don't know. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Oh,
Thank you for being with us.
yes.
And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. Oh, James.
Yeah. I just saw this talk about the student-teacher relationship as just two things. If you're stupid enough to let a student put you up on a pedestal, it's really going to hurt when they see you as a fallible human and they tip you off that pedestal. The other thing is if you put someone up on a pedestal, you're avoiding really growing the quality that you so admire in them. You're actually retarding yourself, your progress. So pedestals and pits, that just kept coming to mind over the last couple of minutes. Um, People think, oh, if I become a cult leader, it'll be so cool. I have lots of money and people will feed my ego. And no, 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 no. It's going to blow up in your face really, really badly. That's why it keeps happening because the dynamic is, fundamentally toxic. Oh, it's relevant, but that's what's
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it is. It is. Thank you, James.
Ian, where are you?
Yeah, there. Yeah, I wanted to expand a little bit on what I said at the beginning about when I left my parents' church at 14, because I couldn't remember what the impetus was, and what Jill just said kind of triggered it, because for me it was very much the same thing, but in respect to all of the religions of the world. I found it just impossible to believe that everybody who wasn't a Christian was doomed. And so that started me to explore all of the other religions. And so now I happily say I have no religion. Not because I'm an atheist or an agnostic or anything else, but because I feel very free to, should we say, borrow whatever I find useful from any one of them, or from any other source for that matter. So just a little bit of, color there about my start to the journey.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Ian.
All right.
Yeah. Mert, I know that you may have had some trouble with your connection stuff, and no pressure, but if you have anything you might like to share before we close, please feel welcome.
I can thank you for the talk to you. I'm very grateful for it.
Well, I'm glad you were able to spend time with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mert.
And we will talk about creating Turkish subtitles for this, because there are now more Turkish students who need them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Last call. Any last thoughts? Did I miss anything in the chat? No, I did not.
Nope. And I have now switched us over to Brady Bunch mode.
Brady Bunch mode. Thank you for such a good, thoughtful conversation, everyone.
Yeah, you guys have been great.
Yes.
As usual.
And it's very cool to have built on the conversation started last week and to go even deeper with it. So this was fun. All right. So we maybe will see you later this evening in just a few hours, really. 6 hours-ish.
Yeah.
If you so choose to join us again. But in any case, thank you for spending this time with us. It's been lovely. And we can wave to each other and wave to everybody watching on the replay. And we'll be around later. Take care. Bye.